Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast, a show that examines all aspects of sexuality, from physical to emotional to spiritual. Join our hosts as they discuss age-old questions, common misconceptions, and the latest topics surrounding sex. They'll tackle topics about sexuality from the complicated to the hilarious and everything in between. GSMC Sex Podcast is your show for all of your questions about sex, even some you might not have thought of yet.
Thank you for listening to the GSMC Sex Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. I'm your host, Gaelika Brown. If you like what you hear, be sure to subscribe to our show on your preferred podcast platform and write a review. Now, I am not a sex expert. I love me some Dr. Ruth, though, but I am not Dr. Ruth. However, I've spent some time on this earth and have experienced some things. I've witnessed some things, and because I'm an excellent listener, I have heard some things. I'm a student of human behavior, and I love to learn. I love to research topics and present what I have learned, which is what I do on this podcast. And of course, I'm going to give my 2 cents about the matter, but I will also include what experts have to say. Now, let's talk about sex. Have you seen the Seth Rogen-produced comedy Good Boys? It came out last year in 2019 about 3 tween boys. The entire movie is chock full of hilarious, misinformed statements about sex. Here is one example from the trailer. One boy pulls out a tampon and says, "Look what I found," while another asks, "What is it?" And the boy with the tampon responds, "It's a tampon. Girls shove it up their butthole to keep babies from coming out. An 8th grader told me that." Now, that is the most ridiculous sex myth I have ever heard. But I'm sure there are sex myths out there that even as an adult, I think is a scientific fact. So I thought it would be fun to explore the topic of sex myths. Medical News Today has an article entitled "Sex Talk: 5 Myths You Need to Drop." Number 1, popping the cherry. This is an age-old belief that a woman's hymen is a good place to look to see if you desire to know whether she's still a virgin, or at least if she has engaged in vaginal intercourse. But although much significance is attached to the hymen as an alleged marker of virginity in many cultures, the truth is that more often than not, it can't tell us much about a woman's sexual history. The hymen is a membrane that lines the opening of the vagina, and its actual shape and size varies from person to person. Normally, it does not cover the vaginal opening entirely, which makes absolute sense since otherwise menstrual and other discharge would not be able to leave the vagina. While vaginal intercourse or some more strenuous physical activities could cause minor hymen tearing, many women do not experience any tearing or bleeding during sex, as the hymen can stretch to accommodate the penis. As Nina Dolvik-Brockman and Ellen Stoken-Dahl, authors of The Wonder Down Under, explain in a TED Talk, this membrane is kind of like a scrunchie, elastic and flexible. Even if tearing does occur, bleeding doesn't always follow. Now, I remember being scared that when I lost my virginity, it would hurt and I would bleed. And bleeding would be nasty and embarrassing. Now, I waited until I was an adult in college before I lost it. And I was shocked that it didn't hurt and it didn't bleed. And I don't know too many women who did bleed when they lost it. Last year, rapper T.I., got into some media trouble over a comment about him going to his daughter's gyno appointment and asking the doctor to tell him if her hymen is intact. He said, And so they come and say, well, I just want you to know that there are other ways besides sex that the hymen can be broken, like bike riding, athletics, horseback riding, and just other forms of athletic physical activity. So I say, look, dog, she don't ride no horses, she don't ride no bikes, she don't play no sports. Just check the hymen, please, and give me back my results expeditiously. So, sorry, T.I. I guess there's no physical way of you finding out if your daughter is a virgin or not, because that hymen myth has been debunked. You will just have to communicate and trust her. Myth number 2, menstruation as the ultimate baby barrier. Another favorite piece of sex lore is that women can't get pregnant if they have sex while on their period. It's true that this scenario is highly unlikely, but even so, the possibility of pregnancy isn't fully eliminated. The likelihood of becoming pregnant after period sex depends largely on how long your menstrual cycle is. In most women, the menstrual cycle lasts for approximately 28 days. Usually 3 to 5 of those days are taken up by their period, during which unfertilized eggs or ovules, I think that's how you say it, OVULES, and uterine lining are eliminated. Women are most fertile during the ovulation stage of their menstrual cycle when fresh eggs are produced. Ovulation usually takes place about 12 to 16 days before the start of the next period. Some women, however, have shorter cycles, which means that their ovulation stage also happens earlier. That, coupled with the fact that sperm can live inside the human body for up to 5 days, means that if the timing is right, sperm could hang out inside the female body for just long enough to survive the period and penetrate a fresh egg. So if you do plan to ease those menstrual cramps by having sex, you may wish to consider using a condom. Yeah, I ain't got no 2 cents on this. And this is referring to the rhythm method, where your previous menstrual cycles are tracked on a calendar, and this information is used to predict future ovulation dates. You abstain from sex, periodic abstinence during your most fertile days. That's too shaky and unpredictable for me, so I don't play them rhythm games. Number 3, it's not an orgasm if it's not vaginal. Perhaps thanks to the super sexed ideal spread by commercial porn, many people are stuck for a long time with the idea that a woman's orgasm is purely a vaginal experience achieved through repeated penetration. A quick look on the internet will reveal that some popular searches include, "Why can't I orgasm?" and "Why can't I make my girlfriend climax?" Well, as Medical News Today explained in a longer piece, there is no one-size-fits-all recipe for achieving orgasms. And very often, women will require clitoral stimulation instead of just vaginal penetration to reach that sweet spot. For some, penetration doesn't cut it at all, and clitoral stimulation alone is their stairway to heaven. Oh. In fact, according to Essentials of Obstetrics, I can't say it. I'm gonna spell it for y'all. I know it's an easy word, but some words really do trick me up. But it's OBSTETRICS and gynecology. So Essentials of that word and gynecology is the name of the book, I believe, or article, where it says women who reach sexual climax, 25% achieve orgasm with penetrative sex, and 75% need extra clitoral stimulation. That's why both men and women would do well to learn as much as possible about their and their partner's bodies and try to understand what makes them tick individually. Preach on. Know your partner's body as an individual. And to those 25% of women who achieve vaginal orgasms, more power to you. Yes. Number 4, masturbation is bad for you. So this brings us to our next item, which is that masturbation somehow is bad for you. There are, in fact, many myths related to masturbation, that it can make a man go blind, that it can lead to erectile dysfunction, and that it can cause sexual dysfunction in women. In fact, specialists argue that there's no such thing as masturbating too often, and that it actually brings a plethora of health benefits, including released tension, eased menstrual cramps, and no less importantly, a roadmap for the body. As sex therapist Tisha Morgan said in a TED Talk, she added that for women, this roadmap learned through masturbation helps them to more readily achieve an orgasm. They become better equipped to solicit the kind of attention that best works for them. As for the notion that frequent masturbation can cause erectile dysfunction, Morgan explained that too is a false concern. That too is a false concern. However, she added that what could happen in some cases is that a man may become used to a certain practice, for instance, quickies, that could then take over in a partnered sex as well as with unwanted results. So yeah, if you jack off super quick, then you might come super quick with a partner. So they say, spend more time jacking off. Do it slowly so that you come slowly with your partner, is what the rest of the article said. So yes, the best way to learn about yourself is to spend time with yourself. So the best way to learn about your body is to spend time with your body. And if you're trying to abstain from sex, it's a great way to abstain, because now you ain't sexually frustrated and eager to hump the first thing that comes at you. So we don't have time to delve into the 5th myth, according to Medical News Today, but I'll tell you briefly that if you are an athlete, you can have sex before a game or match and it won't affect your performance negatively. All right, we'll take a break and return with more sex myths.
Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Welcome back to the GSMC Sex Podcast. I'm your host, Gaelika Brown. This episode is about sex myths. In segment 1, we debunked some myths, but some myths have some truth to them, and we will explore that in this segment 2. So Men's Health has an article about the truth behind sex myths. Men reach their sexual peak at 18 and women reach theirs at 28. True, with regard to their supply of sexual hormones, at least. Testosterone peaks at the age of 18 in men. Women's estrogen hits its high point in their mid-20s. But peak hormones don't mean peak sexual performance, says Mark Goldstein, MD, a professor of reproductive medicine and urology at Cornell University Well Medical College. So feel free to try for a personal best at any age. Now, I did a bit more research about sexual peak versus sexual performance and whether or not there is a peak age for performance. And there isn't. The closest thing I can find is an article on salon.com that says 20-year-olds are having plenty of sex, but the 40-year-olds are actively enjoying it. A spokesperson for the site told the Metro. 40-year-olds have fewer hang-ups than 20-year-olds and more experience under their wing. They really know what they want out of their intimate life. So what's up with the myth of sexual peak? Psychologist Lori Brodo tells the Huffington Post that the idea dates back to early sex researcher Alfred Kinsey. The question he asked were for different age groups. The questions he asked were for different age groups. What is the maximum number of orgasms you have in a given week? Brodo explains. But what the data doesn't reflect well is why are 18-year-old men having orgasms so frequently? They're masturbating all the time. Brodo also unravels how Kinsey likely arrived at age 35 for women. Well, in 1953, when this book was published, they were likely married in a stable relationship and knew who they were, says the psychologist. We know that orgasmic ability becomes more frequent with age and relationship security. So what I take away is that you hit your sexual performance stride once you are comfortable and secure with your sexuality and your partner. Now, I have never heard this myth before. The myth that semen is low carb. False. Semen is mostly fruit, sugar, fructose, and enzymes, not low carb, says Dr. Goldstein, which finally explains why there's no oral sex diet. So this is me talking. If you are trying to stay away from sugar, you have the perfect excuse not to swallow. Sorry, doctor's orders. Another myth, no penis is too large or too small for any vagina. True, but perception still wins the game in the end. I was once at a dinner meeting with 7 other sex doctors, 6 men and 1 woman, says Dr. Pryor. The men all agreed that size doesn't matter. The woman looked at us all and said, "Think what you want, size matters." We all left dejected. So astroglide.com doesn't only sell lube, but they have articles too. And in one article, a doctor from Kinsey Confidential says, a woman's vagina can almost double in length when she's aroused, a process called vaginal tinting. During sexual excitement, muscular tension pulls the uterus upward, which has the effect of making the vagina both longer and wider. Now, instead of being 3 to 4 inches in length, a vagina may reach approximately 5 to 6 inches in length. Dr. Herbenek notes that vaginal tinting may explain why a woman sometimes feels tighter to her partner during intercourse. Ain't no penis small enough, ain't no penis large enough to keep my vagina from adapting. Okay, back to truth behind myths. Oysters make you horny. False. You make you horny. There's no scientific evidence that oysters increase libido, says Dr. Pryor, but there may be a placebo effect. So if it works, great. Here's another one. Cutting out broccoli will make your semen taste better. True. Semen is naturally bitter, and eating broccoli and drinking coffee can make it worse. A ray of hope for the oral sex diet. Having sex in water, swimming pool, hot tub, shower, etc., will kill sperm. True. Some of your swimmers may die, but it isn't an effective method of birth control, according to Dr. Pryor. Though a hot tub can overheat your testicles and kill sperm, there should be plenty left for the egg hunt. Okay, so here are some weird and interesting sex facts I found on astroglide.com. You can't buy dildos in Alabama. Thinking of visiting the Heart of Dixie? Just make sure you pack plenty of sex toys because you can't buy them in Alabama. While it's hard to believe, Alabama still has a law on the books that bans the sale or purchase of any device designed or marketed as useful primary for the stimulation of human genital organs. Violators face a maximum fine of $20,000, the possibility of up to 1 year in jail, or even 12 months of hard labor. In short, you can buy bullets, but you can't buy the bullet. Okay, while the state's Anti-Obscenity Enforcement Act has been challenged multiple times, including in a federal suit brought by the American Civil Liberties Union, it's still the law in Alabama. The good news is Alabama residents can legally cross state lines and stock up on as many dildos and French ticklers as their heart's desire. The toys just can't be sold or purchased within the state. I bet a bunch of people are going to, was it Brookshire? Talking about, this is for a massage. Yeah, right. But why am I not surprised to read that Alabama is still behind in the times? Here's another weird sex fact. Oral sex was illegal in Canada until 1969. You've got to hand it to the Canucks. Or Canucks, how do you say it? To the Canucks. They have a good sense of humor. As Sarah Aspler at BuzzFeed reports, Canadian law prohibited homosexual acts and sodomy, which included oral and anal sex under the statute, until 1969. So it took them long enough, but at least they eventually came around, if you know what I mean. That's them. That was their pun, not mine. But I would make a pun like that. By contrast, the United States didn't toss out its oral sex laws until 2003. What? U.S.? Okay. When the Supreme Court struck down anti-sodomy laws in 14 states in Lawrence versus Texas. So how is oral sex a homosexual act? Man, those poor lawmakers were ridiculously sexually frustrated and ill-informed. I guess 2003 was the year members of the Supreme Court received head from the opposite sex. Here's another one. An orgasm can alleviate cold symptoms. Just when you thought orgasms couldn't get any better, research shows that having an orgasm can help clear your sinuses. According to emergency room physician Travis Stork of the Doctors, the brain tells the adrenaline glands to secrete adrenaline during sexual fulfillment. This release of adrenaline causes the blood vessels to constrict, which in turn causes the sinuses to open. So the next time you're congested, skip the Sudafed and go for the Big O. It's cold and flu season, people. As Missy Elliott so eloquently put it, get your freak on. Get your freak on. Get your freak on. We'll take a break and return with what sex myths you all believed.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Sex Podcast. I'm your host, Gaelika Brown, and we have been talking about sex myths. I found some interesting comments and threads on Reddit that I thought would be fun to share. The first question asked, what about sex did you not know about until it happened? Someone says, I knew that condoms could slip off. I did not know that they could slip off and disappear into my vagina. Afterward, I talked to a couple of friends, and yeah, same thing had happened to them. One of them, it happened twice and took a couple of days to come out, which is also fairly common, apparently. It was a little unexpected. Someone commented and said, happened to me and my husband twice. First time it was still hanging out of my vag. Second time it slipped off and got pushed up inside. I made my husband dig it out. The look of concentration on his face was amazing. He was on a mission to hunt down that treasure, Indiana Jones style. Someone replied to that and said, honestly, you don't realize how much you value someone until you have to fish around for lost objects in their hoo-ha. My 2 cents, don't leave anything in your vagina in the hopes that it will surface in a couple of days. Fish it out. Foreign objects in your body can be dangerous. I am not a doctor, just a person who uses common sense. Another answer to what about sex did you not know until it happened? The penis can grow significantly, that's all caps, when a guy gets hard. I assumed for the longest time that most well-hung gentlemen had all that hanging in their pants at all times. It wasn't until I saw my boyfriend's flaccid penis for the first time that I knew something was up. Big difference. Someone commented and said, George Costanza wishes everybody knew about this. And if you watch Seinfeld, then you would remember George's shrinkage episode. Moving on to the next answer, what about sex did you not know until you did it? That the G-spot feels differently than the rest of the vagina. First time using my hand, I was exploring, seeing what she liked, and all of a sudden I found this spot that feels different than surrounding areas, and she went crazy. So I stayed there. So people started posting tips with everything but the GPS location to the G-spot. So I'm including these tips for the benefit of my ladies. All my ladies. Tip 1. About 2 to 3 inches inside, on the top side, slide your finger, palm side up, and you will feel a different texture there. Feels a little bit like a rougher texture. Don't go straight for it though. Usually doesn't seem to feel as good for them until you warm them up. Get the extra blood flowing and getting things engorged. Good luck and happy hunting. And then he adds an edit and says, just about this, if you don't want to do it with your fingers, go for missionary, stuff some pillows under her hips. To benefit you, you can go deeper and you'll be sliding right along the G-spot. Another tip, pro tip. You can rub it from the outside, just a few inches below the belly button. I've shown people where and how to rub it, but apparently not many others can make that work. Push down on that spot while effing her. Hit that spot from both sides. And here are some responses from women who have benefited from this. A guy did this to me recently, and I had no idea what he was going for until I couldn't think anymore. 5 gold stars to this advice. And another woman said, oh my God, yes. I always felt uncomfortable asking for this, especially because I only really feel it when I have to pee, but it feels amazing. What about sex did you not know until you did it? It's really hot inside. Someone commented and said, you can cook a hot dog in a vagina, I swear. Another commented and said, I have an old coworker tell me about when he lost his virginity. He stuck it in and immediately pulled out, called her an oven cunt, and made her leave. Seemed oddly proud of the fact. And no, he hasn't had a girlfriend before or since. Dude is very off. Now, this is something I just recently learned about, but it makes sense. Vaginas are warm, and with all that friction, I'm sure it heats up in there. And if you can't take the heat, then get your penis out the kitchen. Hey. Okay. Here is something else learned. Shower sex is really hard. Holding her up against the wall was one of the riskiest things I have ever done. Here's a response to that. Sticking to oral in the shower was what I ended up doing. It was awesome. I think the general consensus is that shower and pool sex isn't about pleasure. It's just to say you've done it, unless you are the person who said this. Shower sex is the best, but my fiance and I are lucky that we're exactly the same height. So it might not work with people with a big height difference, but it's slippery and sexy and awesome if you do it right. Here's another question asked on Reddit. What's a sex fact that most people don't know? The male orgasm starts with ejaculation. It can last longer than most women think. Men don't ejaculate because they had an orgasm. They do so because they are orgasming. Too often, I've seen women stop when the liquid part starts, and that's just bad. A commenter said, "Don't slow down. Maintain the pace until he asks you to stop. It's only another 5 seconds, but the difference between 6 out of 10 sex and 9 out of 10 sex." Someone responded to that and said, "Oh, I had a girlfriend that knew that perfectly well. Never have I been so exhausted and happy from a blowjob in my life ever after. Good memories." Which led to someone else to comment and say, "Yeah, it drives me nuts when a girl feels a little cum on her hand and she stops. WTF, I don't stop when my whole fist is soaked in your vagina juice." Here's another fact most people don't know, according to a person on Reddit. As a man ejaculates, you can gently compress the base of his penis, which is concealed in the scrotum, to reach greater levels of pleasure. Like, the pen doesn't just stick out of yo poob mound. Oh, I guess they're saying pubes, like pubic area mound. Okay. It goes deeper within and can be tantalized. Okay, so I have no idea how legitimate that post is, but if you want to explore that for yourself, happy hunting. And let's end with this weird fact. Brazilian nuts are the second most frequent cause of nut allergy in the United Kingdom. We report the case of a 20-year-old woman with documented Brazil nut allergy who developed widespread urticaria, urticaria, and mild dyspnea, dyspnea, after intercourse with her boyfriend who had earlier consumed Brazil nuts. Skin prick testing with the boyfriend's semen after Brazil nut consumption confirmed significant reactivity, whereas a sample before nut consumption was negative. We believe this to be the first case of a sexually transmitted allergic reaction. Okay, we believe this to be the first case of a sexually transmitted allergic reaction. That was found on ncbi.gov. Now, sex myths have been around since the beginning of time, and I'm sure they are not going anywhere. But hopefully, we debunked enough myths and found truth in some of them. Hopefully, you learned something, or at the very least, were mildly entertained. So let's end on this entertaining myth from the movie Good Boys. No, she's a nymphomaniac, someone who has sex. No, she's a nymphomaniac, someone who has sex on land and sea. All right, I definitely appreciate your time. Thank you for listening to the GSMC Sex Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Until next time, I'm Gaelika Brown.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network. From sex and relationships to health and wellness, life and happiness, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts Sex Podcast.